So let's look at the extension controllers now and the custom controllers. First we'll look at the extension controllers. Now this is like if you want to extend the logic, extend the functionality given by standard controller, then you will use extension and custom controllers. So basically for the custom controllers, it does all the hard work by itself, does not use the standard controller. We see how standard controls helps in performing standard actions, but if you need custom navigations, HTTP callouts, you can go for custom controller. If you decide to use custom controller, you need to write the controller class. Okay, this is same for extension. So when you create a custom, you need to create a custom class, create a method which can retrieve or get the data. And if you want any variable to be passed between the controller class and the Visual Force page, it should be a getSet variable. Any getSet variables that you declare in your class can be, the values will be immediately reflected on the UI, and any change in the UI it will be reflected back in the class. Basically, you need to write a method inside the controller to save the data. You have to create the navigational methods. You'll have to use the page reference. All the other things you need to use. And you can use the getter, setter and action methods. Okay. Now basically what you write is you need to write the custom controller. Let's look at and then let's look at the extension. Now suppose you have extensions. You want to extend the functionality provided by standard custom. Again, you'll have to write a class for it. Now look at it here. Apex page standard controller, student master extension, student master extension. So in addition to your standard controller, you are extending the functionality. So basically it has to be in the form of a class. You can have your own save method and override the save method. All that you can do. Even custom can, and there can be multiple extensions. Okay, you can, one Apex class if you just can have multiple extensions. Now, how do you manage sharing in controller? If you want to build a page that respects user permission, although user controller extension class executes in system mode, you need to use the with sharing keyword. When you use with sharing keyword, it will start inheriting all your organization sharing rules. If you do not use sharing rules, then it will run in the system mode. Okay. So now let us look at how to create extension, and then we come back over here. Okay. Before we get into the actual demo, couple of things for error handling. Let's look at some other additional topics before we get into the actual demo. So you can do error handling in Visual Force pages. You can use Apex message to display any error on a specific field, or you have Apex messages, then you have Apex page messages. Apex messages will basically show you all errors that are happening in the backend. Okay. Apex page messages, you'll have to create it with particular one. So, and there is another class called as Apex page message. In this, what you'll have to do is it will always be a permanent screen message. Whereas Apex page messages, you'll have to, from your Apex, you can say Apex pages.message and a new Apex page message, and you type the text that you want. So this is typically to bring the errors and all to the front end. So we'll take a look at this to understand how this works. And now if you want to load any, so these are the 4 types of Apex pages messages that you have in Salesforce Apex. Then if you want to include any external resource in Visual Force, you'll have to first load it as a static resource, and then Apex include script, you'll have to include the tag and the $resource.javascript file or the image file or whichever. So you'll have to say include, you can have multiple JavaScript files also. You can say URL for. Basically, you can also add content delivery network can be added as script source, but now Salesforce is now looking down on this, and it will get depreciated going ahead. That is basically it won't be allowed. Now, if you want to do pagination, you can use the standard set controller. Some example code is shared with you later. So basically, you'll have to pass the query, like when the user presses a button for the forward or next, you'll have to pass the query, and you set the page size for the current, like 10 records or 100 records, and based on that, you'll get a new contact list, and you set the get records for it. Basically, the contact list will be set based on this AP contact set, which is a standard set controller. Alright, so limit and offset, as we have already seen, limit will limit the number of records, offset will show you from which record you want to show the records, right? So I have shared that pagination standard controller example. You can take a look at that later. Okay. Now these are some things which are depreciated. You can also call an Apex. So far we were seeing how to call a command. We will see how to call an action, custom controller action, or an extension controller action from command button. But here we will use Salesforce Visual Force allows you to call Apex from JavaScript button. So this is the way to call it, but this is getting depreciated and it will not work in the future versions. You can do an sforce.apex.execute. So we are going to skip this lesson, but you should be aware, like if you come across this code in a legacy system, you have to migrate these into Lightning components. Okay. Another thing that you may have to migrate into Lightning components is if you're calling any of your functionalities calling Apex from JS remote action. If you have any remote action function earlier in your Visual Force page, this has to be migrated into Lightning components. Okay, this will not work going ahead. Similarly, action function, you can also embed script in Visual Force page. You can say Apex function and call a controller method from JavaScript. Again, this is not going to work, and you'll have to migrate these kind of things into Lightning components. And remember that Lightning migration is not a button click or something. You have to write a new component and rebuild the logic for at least calling that interface. Okay. Basically, you will make an Aura component for it and call it via a get callback method. You can see all of this in the Aura component training stack which I have created in Udemy. So Ajax support in VF, action support is added for event. Now this is Ajax support is like on the click of a button on. This is available. So we will see an example like you have to use the action region and block render attributes to get. If you click on some button like you want a related thing to work on, only that section of the page will be submitted to the Salesforce server, not the entire page. Right now, our entire page gets submitted. So this helps in faster responses between client and server. Now another thing is now when we create all the standard custom controllers, a lot of data keeps going to the server and coming back. So it causes a view state which can slow down your performance. View state is basically the client server state data that is passing between the client to the server whenever you're doing any interaction via standard extension or custom controller, especially during extension and custom controller. So how do you control this? You have to add transient keyword. These variables won't be passed from the controller to the page at all points of time. This will be used if you have any processing to be done. Please keep transient keyword variables for the processing. Don't pass the variables to the server. Any get set variables will get passed to the server. So reduce that. Also static variables will not be passed in each request. Okay. On check SOQL queries. Now if in your controller code you are writing an SOQL and querying for fields which you don't want, then remove those columns from those SOQL if you're not using it in the UI. Now the view state, all non-transient date members get passed. The component tree which represents the page component can be seen. A small amount of data which is say Visual Force used for housekeeping will be passed. View state data is always encrypted and you cannot view it using Wireshark and all. Alright. So but basically if you use these best practices like using transient variables and reducing the SOQL fields in the SOQL queries to only the ones that are wanted, you can improve the view state of the Visual Force page. Alright, so let's build the extension and custom controller and then come back to test classes. Any queries in any of this, please go through the video a couple of times before we proceed with this. Alright, so now let's come back to a developer console, and here what we have here is we have the normal class. We have the normal page which we just created for accounts, right? So now let's create one additional button. Like say I have added an additional button here for save one. It says it does not find it. So this I'm going to create a button. So far we save cancel edit was available in the standard controller. Now I'm going to use the extension controller. So I'm going to say extensions equal to a class name. Now this class has to be created. Okay, when I save this, is going to say this class is not there. Alright, so now right now I have created a class, empty class here. So that's why it's able to do that. So now let me now go to that class and say, now we need to create the class. So this will have a method. Now how do we create a, now important thing about an extension controller, it always needs a constructor with Apex page standard controller as parameter. Why do we need that? Because remember, now you already have a standard controller on this. Now you need to wire this both. So in the extension controller, what you will do is you will basically accept this standard controller parameter so that this extension gets wired with the standard controller. So let us see how to do that. So basically you will create a constructor. A constructor is of the same name, and it accepts. The important thing is first let's build an empty constructor. Now you need to always pass a standard controller parameter to the This will now create the extension controller. This will make it into a correct extension controller. So you have to pass the Apex pages to standard controller, and locally you'll have to create a few variables. Now we need a local variable, okay, and create a local account variable. Make all of this public because we want this to be accessible. Now what happens is, now this standard controller, now his whatever it is used here, now this extension now will have an access to this standard controller page coming from the page. So you need to link the local standard controller with the controller which is getting passed via the parameter. So now this page will now this extension controller has got access to the page, actual page's standard controller. And one more thing is, you need to create a new account. And now when the if you remember, the standard controller also works on an S object. Okay, that S object you'll have to pass it over here, which is in this case an account. So you will say account get record. So you're going to link the current record. Now let's say if I'm on this page, okay, now the current record which is getting created, especially if it is in the edit mode, I will not only link it with the standard controller. The standard controller passes a Apex page standard controller and empty S object to the extension. Now you are going to typecast this to account because I know I'm working on the account object. The standard controller is of type account. Okay, so now with these three my thing is set. So what happens is, link the local extension Apex 3D controller with the param coming in from the page. Import the standard controller to link with the page. Now this is going to be repetitive. Okay, anytime you create an extension controller, you have to pass the standard controller here. So this is basically passing of this variable into this extension. So now these are both on the same page. Now you can write your own code. One more thing is, if you see here, you have to do a page reference. Without page reference, the page redirection will not happen. Okay, so you have to create a page reference, and now you will say public page reference, say 1. No parameters here, it's going to take it from the UI. Okay, so now you have to set the page equal to new page. And now we're going to say like local APS dot save. So now the local APS will work like a standard controller, this variable, and we are going to redirect it to this is one for small parameter you need to pass for the page reference to work. We'll say pg equal to new page reference is nothing but for the redirection for the new record. Otherwise we cannot, because this is standard control extension controller, it does not know. So this we are going to say get id. So this is going to pass it to the id, and you're going to just return the page. That's all we're doing. So the things that we have changed over here is, let's fix this. See local APS save. We missed the class name. So you define, basically you get an access to import the standard controller or inject. to link with the page. Now you create a local replica of all the same. So EPS is the new account. Get record will give you, if it is in edit mode, it will give you that record. Otherwise, then what you do here is you're going to save the record, do the page reference, and redirect it to the new page. So what happens here? What is the difference over here? Please try to understand here. Still having some issues here. Page number 12. Sorry about that. Okay, so now it's saved. So what we have now doing here is, let's say, controller shift tab. So please understand, when the Salesforce comes over here and shows you a page, there are now two methods here. One is a save. This it will find it in the standard controller. Now it is an extension which is test one. So this save one, when it comes here, it will not be able to find this. It will go here into the test one and execute this save one. When it does this, this local aps.save pg. Now the question is, when does the constructor get uh, finalized, executed? Whenever you add this extension and the page is rendered, this constructor is immediately rendered, executed. So this will automatically link with the standard controller. Your new account will get initialized, and your account, whatever is there in the current page, will get linked to this ACC variable. All right. And we are using the standard controller now to save the record. So now let's see how this works now. Local standard controller variable, which is now wired with this in line number 7. So let's see all of this in action. So let's say Marut, let's say Ashirwad Medical. Now this we are going to create using custom save. Now what it's going to do is it's going to create now using the extension control. So this is what you need to understand, and it created this. Okay. So now let's do one thing. Now let's again preview this and say save custom. Now if you see, it still shows you that you need to enter the value. And now if you see here, now this is the problem here. Now if you see here, when I previewed this, I did not get the validation rule. When I previewed this, what I wanted to do is, see, now if you see this, now let me use the standard controller. If you remember guys, now if rating is hot and value is 1, if I do this, it's going to say like annual revenue. If I use the standard controller, it automatically gets the validation rule. But if I use save custom, it doesn't show any message. It just goes ahead. So now we need to get those errors over here. So for that, we have to use the Apex page messages, which we saw in the Apex messages will help us with this. If you add that, now if I preview, now if I try to do the, now it's given me a error over here. It's still not redirecting. Still not redirecting because it is giving an error over there. If I make it warm, it will create that record. But so when I don't have any validation rule, it gives me, it works fine. But if I have a validation rule, let's say I create one more record. If I don't have a validation rule, then it works fine. But if I give a validation rule here, say, and 1, it just goes for a toss. So let's fix this. How do we do that is we need to now use the try catch exception. If you remember, we did a try catch exception. So let's introduce the try here and then the catch. So now if you see, this is how we are going to bring the error message to the front end. So if you see here, we have another way to get the Apex page messages. Sorry, Apex page messages. Apex pages. So we have to let me refer here Apex pages dot severity pages dot message. Pages dot severity dot. And now we're going to say we're going to get the dot get message. So now what is happening here is whenever if at all we have an error message here, so we are just creating an Apex page message and inserting it over here. Correct. So now this Apex page messages tag has to be added over here. So now let's save all of this. Yeah, so now this is for standard any other messages that are there. Otherwise, what you have to do is this is explicitly you're creating Apex page message and then adding it to the UI. So when we come over here, it's going to show you this. So let's preview and see how this works. So now if I have srf 600 and something, and now if I run introduce the error message, let's see. Still, we have to prevent the redirect. The thing is we will not redirect if there is an exception.